Hi, and welcome to Boise State in the Community. I'm your host, Melissa Mione, and I'm joined here tonight with Professor Isaac Castellano of the Political Science Department here at Boise State. Good evening, Professor. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Well, good. Before we get into the actual interview, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background?
Professional background. After I finished school, went to Portland State and did a master's degree in conflict resolution. And did my master's thesis on peace building in Cyprus. So I did some field work in Cyprus, and when I was done with that, I took a job with U.S. Senator Maria Cantwell in her Seattle office, and did outreach and what we call casework, helping individual citizens with their problems they have with the federal government. So worked a lot of veterans cases, worked a lot of HUD, worked a lot of Homeland Security when it was first getting set up. They had a lot of issues. And then a lot of outreach, so got to know the political lay of the land in Seattle and Western Washington and the issues facing the state and business community and nonprofits and activist community and all of that. And my wife, who was working in the city too, we were wanted to try something different, so we went back to graduate school, and we both got into the University of Kentucky, so we went...
That's a change right there.
Yeah, all the way to the Bluegrass State, which, although is often the butt of many jokes, is a wonderful place with wonderful people and a great school. And she transferred up to Ohio State. So when I finished up my PhD in international relations, and she was finishing hers in sociology, she got a job offer here at Boise State, and we moved out. And since then, I've been teaching in the political science department here, and really love Boise and love the campus community and all of that. My dissertation and research focus is on security issues. So I spent the bulk of my graduate school years looking at defense spending. And since then, I've moved on to some other topics. I did a big project on Civil War interventions, and I'm now working on environmental security. So some of how resource scarcity shapes conflict, both in a militarized but also political context, and how that plays out. And I've been teaching international relations courses here at Boise State. Very
cool. How did you get into politics? Kind of like, why did you decide to continue that as teaching?
Oh gosh, well, I've always been interested in politics since I was a little kid. I was that kid on the 5th grade playground who took the social studies book out and read the book.
Wow.
Yeah,
dedicated from a young age.
Yeah, it was some serious nerd business. And my parents went to a very liberal, politically active church that was involved in the anti-nuclear movement of the 1980s and the sanctuary movement, where various church groups across the country housed refugees from Central America, the conflicts in El Salvador and Guatemala, and also participated in a number of civil rights issues. So I just grew up going to protests and marches, and remember being, I must have been in the 7th grade, and Jesse Jackson came to our church. So, yeah, the minister at the time was just a, kind of a, big, I don't know if big is the right word, but just very involved politically, and that, religious interfaith kind of movement that's evolved in the United States for the last 50 or so years. So that church was just very involved. So grew up doing that and got interested in politics and was on the debate team in high school and that kind of thing. And didn't really ever see myself working outside of politics.
Really? It was just kind of that, you were already kind of in that, so it was natural to just fall into it.
Yeah, I mean, what I was going to do in politics was up in the air, but the fact it'd be around politics, I've never had really I have no whatsoever, like, engineering or any, like I couldn't manage a business for the life
Not
of
into
me.
like math, seriously there. Don't
Well, I
write
got into math
anything.
when went back to graduate school.
That's
but,
true.
Yeah, but no, did not have the any kind of business competency. So
This is kind of where it fell in.
yeah.
Well, very cool. You said you mentioned that you had focused on defense spending and then worked your way into environmental. What kind of classes other than international relations? What else do you teach here at Boise
I
State?
teach civil war and terrorism.
Okay.
And international law and organizations.
Very cool.
And I'm teaching it's a international relations seminar, but the topic is environmental security. So it's a class that we can kind of focus on different, more niche areas of the political science literature. And so I'm doing mine on what I'm working on right now. So.
Well, very cool. Well, as you already know, 2017 has been a very interesting year for politics, both nationally and internationally. Why do you think that studying politics is important? Obviously, you grew up with it, but why would you encourage students to continue to study it?
Well, politics is central to so many things that happen in your life. Little things that you don't necessarily notice, but the overall structure of organization of our society is dependent on our political system, stability in that political system, and then choices that are made by political leaders. Everything from how much money you pay in tuition, that's a political decision, to how the quality of the roads you drive on, to the regulatory body that governs the consumer products you purchase at the grocery store. There's an interaction with government in so many facets of our day-to-day life, and so having an understanding of who controls those institutions, how decisions are made, and how we evaluate those decisions and come back to them and make sure we're making the right choice collectively as a society is incredibly important. A lot of folks don't vote. You hear a lot about people saying, well, gosh, it's just a bunch of noise and they're just complaining and they don't really talk about anything. A lot of those are all very fair and true critiques about the political system, but at the end of the day, someone's going to win that election, and they're going to be in a position of power and the power to make a variety of choices that will affect the quality of your life. Obviously, it's difficult at times to understand exactly who's responsible for that pothole on your street,
Exactly.
Or why the economy is faltering and who's responsible for that. So there's a bit of a disconnect, and that's in part where political science is an important discipline, because we come in and we help fill that gap in terms of understanding the causal relationships between decisions in government and how they affect day-to-day life.
Exactly.
So in terms of what we contribute back to society is an understanding of these systems, and with the hope that we're able to make them better. And we've discovered a lot about how just the rules of the system, the rules of how the political decisions are made and how elections are governed and all of that have a tremendous influence on policy outcomes. Sometimes good, sometimes not so good. So fixing that is what people in political science think about and spend their time doing, and that's why you pay us.
Exactly. People like to talk about politics, but the world revolves around politics, so kind of goes hand in hand. I get that. Thank you. Also, your service learning course is attached to your international relations course, which is obviously about just trying to get the kids involved in something other than the classroom. And this year, you're talking about the sovereign citizen movement, which is a big deal here in the United States. Would you care to tell people who may not know what the sovereign citizens are, just what exactly this movement is, why we should care about it, and what exactly what is the threat that they cause?
Sure, absolutely. Well, the sovereign citizens as a movement is a pretty fringe group of people who believe that they are not responsible to follow the laws of the United States. And they have a couple of different legal theories, none of which hold any water, about why they are able to declare themselves free of government intervention and regulation of their behavior. And it can be something as simple as they don't want to have a driver's license. State-issued ID for a lot of sovereigns is kind of a no-go. They don't want to have a license plate. They don't want to have to follow the law that says you need car insurance. And that they're free of that government regulation and intervention. And it really dates back, I mean, their theory about their explanation as to why they can do this dates back to almost a, pre-turn of the century, 1800s, where there wasn't a lot of strong state control of Western states as we know them today, right? And that people lived without government help and so forth. They become dangerous because over the last decade they've been involved and have been in shootouts essentially with police officers who have encountered them because they clearly were violating some law, like not having a proper license plate. And in the course, since 2004, I believe they've murdered 8 law enforcement officers across the country. And they really got on people's radar in 2009 in a shootout they had with West Memphis, 2 West Memphis officers who both died in this shootout.
Oh, wow.
So they pose a threat because of that violent history. Not all sovereign citizens are violent. I want to make that clear. But they all prescribe at some level to the notion that they are above the law and they do not have to follow the law. And why that's important is we are a nation of laws, and when you begin to say, okay, you don't have to follow this law and you don't have to follow that law, then we get to a place of chaos pretty quickly.
Like where do you draw the line then?
Exactly. So having a message that just reminds people, and the goal of the students' campaign is to remind the general public that you should be supportive of nonviolent political activity. If you don't like the law, and that's certainly, would never say to anyone, do not oppose the government, do not protest, do not get your message out there. That is one of the beautiful things of our democracy, is that we can do that, but we are required to do that in a nonviolent way. And the other part of the message, obviously, is to make the community aware of these fact that law enforcement and government agents, government officials, have been targets of sovereigns in the past, and what they're most well known for is what's referred to as a paper war, and that's where they file false liens on anyone who's opposed them, or mainly government people they don't like. And so a false lien, as you know, is just a hold on your property, which means you couldn't sell a piece of property that you had unless you cleared out this lien, and they're very difficult and timely, and you have to hire a lawyer. And so
all for something that's made up, usually.
Exactly. And so there's been some awareness of that. Some statutes have been changed in a number of states that have allowed county clerks and the Secretary of State not to just accept every piece of not every lien application that comes in. The students, though, in this service learning project, and what's really cool, one thing that's really cool about it is that it's part of a national competition that is sponsored by Facebook and the Department of Homeland Security. And the goal of this is to help the U.S. government come up with good counter-radicalization messages and campaigns that will be effective to undermine any violent extremist radicalization that's happening out there. And obviously the impetus was for the success that ISIS had in radicalizing U.S. citizens here. And so thinking about how do we tap into the millennial knowledge of social media and all of that, and use that in this fight against violent extremism. So that's what's really cool about it, is that it's not just our students here at Boise State, but across the country are thinking about how do we, tap into a message that's going to undermine these radicalization efforts by violent extremists. And that's really cool that they're part of this kind of national movement.
So this competition, again, was called the Peer-to-Peer Challenging Extremism, is that correct?
Yeah.
And so what exactly did this group of students do? Like, how did they go about, what was their particular tactic of going about to fight the extremism of sovereign citizens?
Yeah, so they were given $2,000 from essentially Facebook and the Homeland Security to fund their campaign, and so they are using that money to bolster their message. The message is we have a Facebook page, and the message is essentially to stand with the law, or at least acknowledge the supremacy of law, and the need to be to need not to violently oppose the government. And so the students organized a one-day Sovereign Citizens Awareness Conference here on the Boise State campus this past Tuesday, April 11th, and we had participation from the Canyon County Sheriff Kieran Donahue, former U.S. Attorney for the District of Idaho, Wendy Olson, and then two representatives, Representative John Gannon, Democrat, and Representative Patrick McDonald, a former U.S. Marshal and county deputy himself, so with a law enforcement background.
Very nice.
So the idea of that conference was to generate some understanding, because everyone had experience either with sovereigns directly or with promoting the necessity to be following the law. And of course, all those participants, they were all fantastic, and they made the message very clear that, this is the great thing about democracy. You can get out there and say that you're against taxes, you're against license plates, you're against whatever regulation, but you need to do it non-violently.
Yeah. You can't force your own opinions physically against another human. That makes sense.
That is the opposition collectively we have against terrorism. It's not that no one's sympathetic to how our foreign policy might cause problems abroad or anything like that. I mean, I think if you sat down with any American, they would say that. But the moment you try to use a bomb to convince us, that's over. We're not going to talk to you.
That was what I was going to say. So this is kind of the Homeland Security and Facebook's way of using this one form of extremism to kind of, because it is attached to your international politics class. And I was wondering, what is the correlation between that class and this particular service learning? Like, why does it go hand in hand?
Well, the topic of sovereigns does not really fit well into the class, but and that's in part, we would have likely picked some more international themed radicalization to combat, but Homeland Security, through the Ed Ventures, the company that's managing the competition, reached out to us and asked us if we would take on, sovereign citizens or white supremacists here, because there had been an uptick in the state of Idaho with both those groups, according to the Department of Homeland Security. So we opted to go with that, but the content of the competition, what the students are doing, is exposing them to a lot of the hands-on job skills that will be required of poli-sci graduates, which is namely being involved in conducting research and then formulating a communication strategy to get that whatever that message is out into the greater community. And so students spent a decent amount of time reading about sovereign citizens. We had a really fascinating conference call with a researcher at the Department of Homeland Security and a current U.S. attorney who spoke about, gave us a lot of background and firsthand experience, their firsthand experience in working or combating sovereigns themselves. And so they had a really nice background of research to kind of percolate on and then formulate a message and then get that message out there.
Okay. Very cool. You mentioned that the students had created a Facebook page. Their hashtag that they were supposed to create a hashtag, correct? And theirs was One Nation Under the Law. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Very cool. And KITI, the channel news station, just recently did a segment on them, and that was one of their promotions was in the quad, was it?
Yeah.
And so they were just out in the Boise State Community Quad.
Yeah, out in the quad and trying to capture students and take a few minutes at a time to talk about sovereigns. Obviously, a lot of folks don't know about sovereign citizens, not aware of the ideological background and some of the issues that they've raised. So it was great. I think they had a real good, the weather wasn't the best, but they had a real good opportunity to meet with students and talk to them and promote the event. And then one of the kind of the action piece of the campaign is to take a picture with we had these little clipboards that say, one nation under the law, and then why they're choosing to support the campaign. So a lot of people had because of democracy, because of freedom, because
And the whole purpose was to get support and promotion. And didn't the KIVI Channel News actually had a segment on that? I think we have it if we can go ahead and take a look at it. And they actually got a lot of news from that. A lot of people got a look at it. So why not we take a look at it right now, if that's all right.
A group of Boise State students is taking part in a national competition to help fight violent extremism. Anna Silva is live in studio to tell us more. Anna?
Jillian, the students are a service learning group who are entering a contest called Peer-to-Peer Challenging Extremism. The contest is organized by Facebook and the Department of Homeland Security. The Boise State team, One Nation Under the Law, is teaching people about the sovereign citizens movement. They spent some time yesterday on the quad asking students to share why they follow the law and how it benefits them. Students wrote their reason on a board and took a picture of it. One of the students from the service learning group says she is motivated by social issues and wants to get the word out.
What we're doing is looking at the sovereign citizen movement and other similar radical ideologies and more extreme ideologies, and educating people on what the dangers of those are, how those threaten law enforcement officers, how they threaten our just general institutions of government, and then the people themselves.
Mackenzie says the group just wants to stress the importance of following the law. The social media contest is based on views and interactions on the group's Facebook page, One Nation Under the Law. The students will be promoting their event today at the Sovereign Citizens Awareness Conference at noon in the Special Event Center at Boise State. Live in studio, Anna Silver, Good Morning, Idaho.
So that's awesome. Your students got
that was very cool.
TV and everything. So my last question before we close up tonight is, what do you want students to take away from the service learning project? You had mentioned that you wanted them to get just, I don't know, kind of a chance to take part in something other than in the classroom, but what do you want other students to do or to know about service learning and why they should, in fact, invest in it? Service
learning is ultimately a way for you to get your feet wet as a student into the professional world. Typically in a very more well-developed project than you might otherwise have if you're an intern, depending on where you end up with your internship. And so this is a way to do a very concrete set project that exposes you to the professional environment, and typically the time commitment isn't as substantial as an internship would be. Certainly if you're in the political science department and you're going to do a 3-credit internship, it's going to be 180 hours over the course of the semester. So that's quite a big time commitment to make. And so you get with that exposure to what a community partner is doing. In our case, our community partners are essentially the Department of Homeland Security and Facebook. So the students in this group have got exposed to some of the kind of organizational thinking. They've got to work with a budget, and so they had to deal with a real
one too,
a real budget
a real one.
with real money, and had to make tough choices on how we spend that money, and then craft a campaign a campaign message that's going to get traction with the target audience. They've had to buy ads. And so think through some of the, what kind of demographics we want to target with the ads. They've had to arrange this conference and put on an event, and so they had to deal with the logistics of that, and getting the speakers there and making sure we had the right roles and everything was lined up, and then of course working as a team, which is always a difficult thing to do, and having more practice with that. So. In that regard, I think my hope is they walk out of this with a real nice experience where they've got to do a number of different things and get exposed to different things. And maybe they got into the ad buy stuff and they're like, this is so cool, I want to do ad buys and think about campaigns. And maybe they got into hearing from the Homeland Security folks and thinking about how a bureaucracy like DHS would prioritize and deal with a threat like this. And they say, oh, man, I should get into. So it's a way to just test out a couple of different roles, see what you get attached to, see what you like, without the big time commitment that you see with internships. And that hands-on experiential learning, we know the research is real clear. If we just yap at you,
we don't take it all in.
You're not. It's hard to listen to someone talk at you. So, so just thinking, I'm trying to always integrate. How can we create some hands-on experiences where students can broaden their skill set, and while also having a deep educational experience.
Sounds like a great opportunity. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. That's all we're going to have tonight, and thank you, Professor,
thank you for having
for
me.
coming in for us. And we'll see you guys next time. I'm Melissa Mione, and have a good night. Thank you.